Hi, welcome to Elma Wine and Liquor's YouTube channel. My name is Tim. I am here today to answer a question that we get quite frequently in the store and online, which is, what is the difference between a sweet wine and a dry wine, or what makes a wine sweet or dry, and try to understand the differences between those two types of wine. Just to start with, very basic high-level view, sweet definition means something that is sugary. You know, you've all had sugar, honey, syrup, things like that that are sweet. That is a taste. Dry, on the other hand, is often a very confusing term for people because obviously dry is not a taste, and you're drinking a liquid, so how can it be dry? It's more of a sensation that you get when you're drinking it than the actual taste or flavor of the product. So I know it's a little bit confusing right off the bat. I'm throwing some terms at you that are, one's a taste, one's a sensation, but we're comparing them against each other. Instead of saying sweet and bitter, we're saying sweet and dry. So with that understanding, there's a couple different ways that wines can be sweet or dry. The first kind of basic way is that in grapes, there's sugar. Wine's made from grapes. Grapes have a lot of sugar in them. When you make wine or any alcohol, you add yeast to the liquid from the grapes, and that ferments. Yeast eats the sugar and turns it into alcohol. So while that yeast is eating up all the sugar content from the grapes, it's producing the alcohol. So one of the things that winemakers will do to make a sweeter wine is they will add less yeast, or they'll kill the yeast at a certain point in the production so that more of the residual sugar stays in the wine. Residual sugar just means the sugar that's left back in the wine after the winemaking process is done. So a great example of this are Moscatos. I have the Capisaldo Moscato and Bartonura Moscato, both Italian, both very well-known big brands. And you can see here on this Moscato, it is 5% alcohol by volume, which is a pretty low amount of alcohol for a bottle of wine. But these are extremely sweet. They have a lot of sugar left in them. And that is kind of that process that I was just talking about. Not a lot of yeast, not a lot of alcohol production, a lot of residual sugar left in there. That can also happen in the case of dessert wines, which you may be familiar with. Ice wines are the prime example, where the grapes are harvested later in the season. Late harvest Riesling is a term you may have come across. By nature, the sugar develops more and more and more the longer it sits on the vine. So when it's a later harvest, there's going to be more sugar to start with. So if a winemaker, for example, picked the same Riesling grape at the beginning of September and at the end of October and put the same amount of yeast into that fermentation process, he or she could end up with a dry wine from that September one and a sweet wine from that end of October one. So that the beginning sugar count also can play into how much residual sugar is left in the grapes at the end of fermentation. But at the end of the day, sweeter wines, higher residual sugar, usually lower alcohol. Another way they get to sweet wines is some winemakers will actually add in additional sugar after the process, after the fermentation process. These are a little bit less common, but in some of the mass-produced products out there, you will find that they might add in a little bit more sugar. Moving along a little bit further, I have a Pinot Grigio here, which also happens to be from Italy. And this one is 11.5% alcohol. And so it's obviously a pretty good step up from the Moscatos. It will be a lot less sweet than the Moscatos, but it won't be bone dry. It won't leave your mouth feeling that very extremely dry sensation that some other wines do. So there's still a little bit of residual sugar in there, but not a ton. Here in New York State, where I'm filming right now, where our store is, a lot of the New York State wineries actually put a scale right on their bottles of sweet to dry, or they'll tell you exactly how much residual sugar is left in the bottles. It's not an extremely common thing in other winemaking regions around the world, but if you ask the winemakers, they usually know. So that's another way to figure out how sweet the wine is. But just as a basic primer in the store, looking at the alcohol content, should give you a pretty good indication of how sweet or dry the wine is. Obviously, as with almost everything in the wine world, there's always going to be exceptions to that rule. We've had Moscatos that people have tried to sell us that are 15-17% alcohol because they do unique processes to try to get that alcohol content up while maintaining the sweetness. Jumping over to the drier end of the scale, I have an Italian Chianti, which comes in at 14% alcohol, which is again another jump up. This also is affected by the sugar content of the particular types of grape at harvest. Like I talked a little bit about with the Rieslings, the difference between the late harvest and the early harvest. But for the most part, they let the yeast do its thing and ferment out all those sugars. So this will be a bone dry wine. It will leave your mouth feeling that kind of sense of dryness. And that's partially because there's no sugars in it, and then also partially because this is a red wine, and they leave the skins in contact with the wine during the winemaking process, which adds tannins to the wine. Don't want to get super in-depth into tannins during this video, but essentially what those tannins do is add some astringent factors that kind of help give you that dry sensation on your mouth that after the sip, you finish your sip, and all of a sudden you're kind of feeling your mouth like pucker, like, my mouth's feeling dry, I need another sip, which is why the wine's still in your glass. Take another sip. The combination of dry wines is almost all of the sugar is fermented out, and then also they oftentimes will have tannins through the form of skin contact on the grapes. I also have this Cabernet here from California, which is considered a dry wine. This one is 14.5% alcohol. On this one, some people get confused because on the first sip or in the upfront palate, you might get a big blast of fruitiness, which blackberries, plums, blueberries, cherries, you'll hear all different types of fruit descriptors. And like those particular fruits, when you bite into them, take a piece of them or pop them in your mouth, they tend to taste sweet because of that fruity, sugary goodness to them. With wines like that fruity sensation, we don't necessarily consider sweet in the same sense that we consider these Moscatos. It's just a more of a fruity wine, but then it will, because of the sugar is mostly fermented out, and because of the tannins from the grape skins, it will finish more on the dry side and still leave your mouth with that dry sensation. So it's a little bit confusing because it can taste a little sweet up front because of that fruitiness, but it will still be a dry wine on the finish, which if there's somebody that does not like dry wine, they don't like that sensation that the dry wine leaves, then they may not care for this. Or on the other hand, they might actually find that they enjoy it because that they still get that blast of fruitiness up front that kind of satiates their desire for that sweetness. Another aspect of dryness that I don't have an example with me today is acidity. Well, actually, I kind of do. This Chianti will have some good acidity to it as well as the tannins from the grape skins. Acidity is another one of the balancing acts of a winemaker plays with when they're making wine. And that acidity, thinking about biting into a very tart lemon or lime or even a bitter orange, that acidic sensation can sometimes make your mouth feel a little bit dry on the finish as well. It'll kind of make you pucker up. Your mouth feels dry. You start salivating. You want another sip because your mouth is feeling dry. A great example of a wine other than the Chianti, which also has the tannins in it, would be a Sauvignon Blanc. Some Pinot Grigios as well, but Sauvignon Blancs are very well known for their really high acidic content, which makes them a very refreshing wine to drink because you get some of that fruitiness up front, and then you get some of that strong acidity on the finish. That's what makes those pair particularly well with fatty fishes like salmon. kind of help wash that fat off your palate while you're taking a bite, taking a sip. I guess with that, I'll just kind of jump back to the beginning. Sweeter wines, great for sipping with on their own on a hot day. Some people call them porch pounders because you can sit on your porch and pound a whole bottle at 5%. Also great with some light cheeses or some light appetizers before dinner. Pinot Grigios, that kind of middle of the road sweetness wise on the white side, great to pair with whitefish, seafood, clams, mussels, things like that. And then these drier reds especially are great with big meats or red sauces, foods like that kind of finish off your dinner. And then you can always go back to a little splash of sweet for dessert, or jump into an ice wine or a port, which is a whole other category that we'll get into in a future video. So that is kind of the rundown of sweet versus dry. I hope that made a little bit more sense to you than you came in to this video with. But if you have any other questions, we would love to hear them, whether it's on this topic or another topic. You'll be seeing me a lot more on YouTube and on the other socials. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you spend the most time, and we will be there. We really look forward to hearing your questions and comments. Please like and subscribe to all of our videos, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers.